Very good. So let us bless. Lasok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai. Eloheinu melech haolam. Asher kitshanu b'misotav etzivanu. Lasok b'divrei Torah. All right. So a bit of review. We're making our way through the various gates to heaven, the gates of mystical thinking. Last week, we encountered the third gate, which is known as Sharei Shamayim, entrances to holiness. So I thought we would start there and review before we move to the fourth gate, Atzat HaShem, which is the hands of heaven. So let me move this out of the way. So I really love this reading because it kind of has a very everyday, mundane quality, even though it's a holy inspiration, reflection, right? I long to go to like a ball game where I would have tickets that I could give to the ticket gatherer and go watch a ball game or go to a concert. So I felt the need to bring this particular reading to bear. So let's start with Linda Przansky, and then
other people come who would sell us tickets to the holy places, who perhaps once, or perhaps still, but probably never, were themselves graced to witness or themselves to ascend higher. Culture and organized religion conspire to trick us into believing that entrances to holiness are only at predictable times and prearranged places. Sometimes they are right. Otherwise, people would not pay their dues, and most of us professional holy people would have to set out again in search of the nameless one.
all right. So tickets are on the mind, you know, so we think about the high holy days coming up. High holy days remind us of the transaction of tickets in holy time and space. And it seems very transactional, practical in the sense that everything's organized around this notion, this transactional notion that we are going to pay some money, get a ticket, be able to go in, have a sacred experience. And the rightness of this is not that it's right in some kind of deep inherent way. Theoretically, the pursuit of holiness should not be transactional. There are elements that need or require material sustenance, right? And without that sustenance, there's no Torah, ein kemach, ein Torah. But here, I think the inherent message ultimately is that these entry points to holiness are open all the time. It's more a function of our awareness more than our paying for a ticket or buying a ticket. Makes sense? Any thoughts, questions?
Just one.
Yes, please.
And those who are not muted, mute so that sirens and stuff don't bother us unless you're reading.
Okay, that's a good point. Anything related to the reading itself?
Yes.
Cassandra, feel free to keep an eye on the chat box for me. I would really appreciate it. Okay, well, I don't see any other thoughts here or questions, unless Devorah, you had your hand up. Sorry.
I did. I think it's interesting that we're reading this as we prepare for High Holy Day services and are wondering about all this.
Yeah.
Because in the past, people brought sacrifices to feed the priests.
Right.
Now we have membership to help maintain our leadership and our building. So.
Right. Now we have the COVID pandemic.
Yes.
And so the notion of tickets sort of irrelevant. Although, and by the way, in case you're wondering, I'm well on my way to the COVID-19 weight gain.
Yeah.
So no need to feed the rabbi. No, that's actually true. Lost some weight. Hoping not to gain the COVID-19.
Wait, I have a question about services.
Yes.
High Holy Days. Is there a chance we're actually going to be able to have services in person?
Well, as of today, we're not going to behave like there's a chance.
Okay.
Of course, in the larger scheme of life, there could be a chance, but it would be really hard for us to plan for such a small chance and not be ready to deliver everything online.
Got it. Okay.
And so we are going to prepare as though everything is going to be online. Don't do that with great joy, but I do it with a certain sense of resolution that we are going to do whatever we do in a way that enables us as a community to witness the holiness and sacredness of Yom Kippur in virtual space, in our virtual village, at 5959 online. It won't be the same as being in the building, but we'll find ways to organize our efforts so that it feels meaningful.
Marsha?
Look, I mean, I think one thing we've learned in this COVID reality is that we can engage in meaningful Jewish behavior, sacred behavior, like this very moment where we're studying Kabbalah online in a way that maybe if we were only reliant on 5959 North Sheridan, we might not actually be able to convene in the same sort of way here at 11 o'clock before Shabbat. I must tell you, it's one of my favorite activities all week is this class with you. And it's such a spiritual experience. And the fact that we are using this spiritual experience, at least I am, in a way that prepares me for Shabbat, it means a lot. And so I certainly can continue with this kind of online learning, even when we're back in the building. But before, we weren't really experimenting with these things. And necessity really called us into a new pathway, a new portal to holiness. And so, yes, I mean, theoretically, we'd like to have our designated times and spaces. We learned that last week in Parshat Emor, which laid out the holy days, when they're supposed to happen in the year. And we've talked in any number of formats this week about the power of routine to shape our lives and give it structure and predictability. The reality is, though, is with COVID-19, all that is challenged, including whether or not we really need a structure all the time to witness holiness. And the answer, I think, is fairly clear, that it's great to have our building. It would be wonderful. Look forward to High Holy Days at 5959 North Sheridan. But we have this space. Maybe it's only a facsimile, but yet we're creating a powerful moment and pathway to holiness. All right, let's move to the next slide. Underscores the point. Iris, please. Entrances to holiness.
The cycle alternates between grand cathedrals and meditation amidst the trees of the forest. When people become convinced that the places and the things are themselves holy, or that only some people have the spiritual power, then it is time once more to set out for the fields and rediscover the fundamental truth. Entrances to holiness are everywhere and all the time.
Yeah.
Exactly what you were just saying.
Yeah. Look, I mean, this is the power of this moment. I am so sad that 80-some thousand people have died because of COVID-19. I am so sad that so many others have gotten sick. I am so sad that our freedom is vastly limited in order to stay healthy. But I also know that what makes the experience a lot more livable and even more inspiring if you can put it that way, is that these portals to holiness exist everywhere and all the time, even in the humdrum boredom of quarantine, right? Which enables us, gives us a certain emotional strength, curiosity, will to open ourselves up to anything that we might find not only helps us usefully pass the time, but maybe fills that time with purpose and meaning or spiritual power. And the beautiful thing about this is that it's not relegated to a particular space or confined to a particular space. And it's not just the work of people who are professional Jews. We all have the same access to these entrance points. These portals, these doorways, these gateways, all belong to you and me. Yes, I'm ordained as a rabbi, and I have no more or less access than you do. These portals belong to us all, which means that we can walk together on this beautiful journey into these places. By the way, I would add to the cycle of grand cathedrals and meditation in nature to online virtuality. Our virtual village becomes like a grand cathedral, or becomes like walking in the forest and meditating between the trees. It can be a powerful bridge that transports or conveys us to these spiritual doorways, these spiritual gateways. All right, let's move to gate number 4.
We have a request in the chat box. It sounds like somebody's got a radio on in the background, and if that could get turned off, we would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not hearing the radio, but if somebody is, and I also can see. If I mute, then you can't. Then Sammy can't hear. Hopefully that's not me. Hopefully that's not me. Sam's quiet. His background's quiet.
I think it's Marcia.
Marsha, is your radio on? Just turn it down if it is, please, and thank you. All right, so 4th gate, hands of heaven, Atzat HaShem. I broached this focus last week when I was telling you about my dear professor, Lawrence Kushner, the author of this book. We were studying Sparks Beneath the Surface, Itorei Torah. We were not too far from ordination at this point in our rabbinic school careers, and he's telling us that free will is overrated. So what that means is that there's a whole segment of our reality, maybe even the primary segment of our reality, that's only to do with the hands of heaven. In other words, God's in charge. God shapes and molds us. God guides us. Our freedom is not all that we think it is. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. In my reality, I don't know if that's true or not in your own reality. But I do wonder if there are things in your lives, our lives, that tempt us to think that maybe there's something beyond us in charge of realities in our lives. That'd be interesting in the chat box. People could maybe make a note of something they think, or at least are tempted to think, is in God's hands versus your own. If there's anything, obviously. If you don't feel that way, that's okay too. Maybe drop something in the chat box for us. And of course, you can speak out loud as well.
I'm typing it into the chat right now. Mary Lou says, our health feels like it's in God's hands. So does What a Great Website.
All right, so health, when something seems difficult or impossible, we surrender over to God. Prayers of healing, like the Mishaberach. Good, good.
Oh, Linda, yeah, the length of our lives.
Okay. I found that when we were expecting, both Kara and Jared, we didn't feel that we wanted to know the gender. We thought that was God's surprise. You know, it's a little bit of biology, a little bit of God. We just waited till it was apparent. Although I must tell you, slightly cheeky, slightly tender, I was convinced that my son would be a daughter. And then he wasn't. So we had a good laugh over that. So let's see. Reuben, please. God's plan will come to be. Proverbs 19:21.
I think I can only see part of the screen.
Loud.
Life is escapably filled with meaning. That is because the whole thing is
I know, it's very
healing.
loud.
We have no more freedom than an oak tree. That is, we are free to be who we are, or free to pretend that we are someone else. But we are not free to be someone else. And this is the meaning of meaning, being connected with something that is itself connected with something. Being part of a constellation of parts that is itself part of an even greater scheme. Or in other words, the notion of parts in the truth, a convenience we perpetrate so as to permit us not having to fathom the consequences of our most trivial acts. Nothing is entirely separated, separate. No one acts with the priest. The Holy One is always involved.
Right. So, freedom. A freedom is no more than that of an oak tree. Isn't that interesting? We're free to be whatever we want to be. We're not free to be someone else.
This makes me think of, I'm pretty sure it was Brothers Karamazov, but I wouldn't bet on it. But there's a scene where the high priest arrests Jesus, and the crime is that Jesus gave people choice.
Okay. So choice ultimately is a function of freedom. The question is, how far does that freedom go? So we are free to be whatever we want to be. We can even pretend to be whatever we want to be. That's an act of freedom. But we can't fundamentally be someone else. I'm not clear we don't have more freedom than an oak tree, but that may be, a bit of arrogance, kind of a human-centered arrogance. Maybe there's a certain value to human life and nature that have a certain equality, at least in this context. But there's a sense of connectedness between all of us. Even though you and I can't be exactly the same, somehow we're still connected. So that means how I act has some impact on you, even though you are not me. If nothing is entirely separate, then any act of kindness I do somehow will make the world a better place, and you will reap some level of benefit. Conversely, I can do something unkind, and somehow it will make your life lesser than because of it. You may not feel it so palpably, but there's this sense that I am not free to act without in some way impacting you. And the reason this happens is because God is somehow connecting the two of us.
And are you free to act?
Look, I think we're free to act. I think we're free to act. You can act kindly, you can act unkindly. You can be free to be who you want, a kind person. You can pretend to be someone else, maybe a not kind person, or if you're not a kind person, you can pretend to be kind. All these things you have freedom to do. The thing is that no matter what you do in this context, somehow or another, it will impact everyone else. Because at the end of the day, despite whatever freedoms you have, you also are connected through God to everyone else. And so anything you do, plus or minus, positive or negative, will impact someone else. Even the most trivial acts, as Rabbi Kushner says here. Right? And to think that we have complete freedom from that doesn't matter, then gives us some license not to act in a way that will make a difference. Makes it okay to be less kind, right? Acting less kind will make a difference, but a negative one. Nothing is entirely separate, not even the most mundane of acts. What sort of society do you think we would build if we carried on this perspective? I mean, think about even our own time, where people are really struggling with impingements on their freedom because of COVID-19. I see people longing to get outside, to be in nature. I see people not wearing masks because they don't want to be impinged upon, or they're invincible, or they don't have any issues and won't pass anything on. And they want to have the freedom to just go maskless. I see people, going to bars and having fun and not observing physical distancing norms. Seems like an act of freedom. I think it's an act of freedom to stay in quarantine. An act of freedom to take the risks of not having a booming economy because everybody's in quarantine. Right? These are all acts of freedom. Even if there are some rules that, force us inside or permit us to go outside. What do you make of these, these freedoms around these conflicts around freedom? Yes, Iris.
So I think it's kind of the antithesis of what this is saying, because people are acting as if they're not connected. Especially, I'm speaking specifically of those people who are going out without masks, who are going to bars, who say that it's more important for me to live my life than care if I get somebody else sick or cause someone else to die.
Right.
So that's, to me, is being not connected, disparate,
Yeah.
not recognizing the connection between all of us.
Well, our spiritual concern would be, you and I are all connected. It may not be obvious to you, but what you do impacts me.
So,
And now, whether it's God as the bridge, I'll leave that up to you in terms of your own theology. I think God connects us, but I don't know if everybody does.
Right, we do have to deal with the atheists.
Yeah, no, I get it. But, look, the idea that somehow our freedom is not completely free. And we know this when we talk generally and even specifically during during Passover, rather, when we say, until everybody's free, I'm not free. Yes, my ancestors may have left Egypt, and as such have enjoyed freedom ever since. But I'm not living amidst human trafficking, but some are.
Right.
I'm not victimized by racism, but some certainly are. I might have lots of privileges due to the fact that I can afford to shelter at home during this COVID-19 pandemic, but not everybody has that freedom.
in trying to understand why these people would do such a thing and looking at it, all right, looking at it from their point of view.
Right.
Some of those people who are thinking about it really feel like they're an important part of their being, of their life is their freedom.
Yeah.
Okay. And they feel like it's being taken away from them, and they don't understand, the impact, and they don't care almost.
Right.
Because, people go and give up their lives for freedom in war. So they're not giving up their freedom. I don't.
Yeah, no, listen, I can understand the sentiment. What we're learning here, and by the way, I bring this up not so much to render judgment, although it may feel that way to some, and I understand. What I'm trying to reflect on here is this text that does a powerful job at helping us recognize that even the most trivial of our acts, which we may have the freedom to ignore, can impact other people. I love this story about a man who has a beautiful mansion, and he's a bit miserly in his spirit and a bit protective of his own freedom. And one day he decides he has the freedom to take from his garden a bunch of large rocks and to throw those rocks out onto a public road. And this is not a problem for him because he cleans out his garden with these large rocks. But then people walking down the public road start jumping out of the way because there are rocks flying at them. They stub their toe on the rocks on the road. And it's really created a public nuisance. And meanwhile, this guy, is championing that he's got the freedom to do that because it's his property.
But the road isn't.
But what's problematic, of course, is he's throwing what's on his property onto public property.
Right.
And putting people in peril. And so what's interesting here is, how much of our freedom, which we should protect, even sometimes with our lives, and we have soldiers who do that to protect our freedoms, how much sometimes do we have to deny our own freedom for the sake of others, particularly in public settings that belong to us all? Here, this teaching is trying to help us understand there's a level of connectedness that goes even beyond public versus private. That we are part of a world in which we're all connected in some shape, way, or form. And so any act of kindness that I have the freedom to pay forward is going to have a ripple effect that it impacts us all in some way. You may not feel it exactly, but the theology is that everybody gets impacted. The same is true for even trivial acts that we may think, look, I'm not sick. No one has to worry.
So my question is,
So I'm going to go out and have some fun. I'm going to go out and express my freedom. And that may have an adverse impact, not only in that person, but others. And they don't even realize it.
Some people have COVID-19 without having symptoms.
Well, that's true. So,
and my question is this morning I saw a woman being interviewed in a bar in Wisconsin, happens to be a nurse. And what good does she do going back to work? And then infecting people at work.
Ruben, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time hearing you.
Okay, I heard what Ruben said.
Please tell us.
He heard a woman interviewed, I presume on TV this morning, from a bar in Wisconsin, and she's a nurse.
Yeah.
So the question is, if she gets infected in this bar where nobody's wearing masks, and then she goes to work, how many people does she infect?
Well,
is she a nurse in the hospital, Ruben? Or
yes.
So how many people is she infecting in the hospital?
How about in the bar?
Yeah,
What if she comes into that bar without a mask?
yeah, no, it's
Right.
it's
And
all
a
those
powerful
people in the
ethical
bar
question.
and
Powerful ethical question.
She's a nurse in Illinois.
That's an interesting question.
Really?
That I think.
Oh, my
does-
husband just said she's a nurse in Illinois who apparently traveled to Wisconsin so she could go to a bar.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
to know there's Mishnah on how we should act in public spaces, and I wonder if that might shed some light on this.
Yes, it's not something I can draw on at this minute. So we'll have to put that in the parking lot and address it.
this is not a very Jewish comparison, but I did hear somebody, it might have been somebody from one of the airlines, talk about smoking and how you used to be able to smoke anywhere and now you can't smoke anywhere, certainly not in an airplane or restaurants, and people just got used to it.
Right.
And so the idea that there are people who think their freedom is being impinged upon to wear a mask, they just have to extend their thinking a little.
Well, look at it. They had fights over that too, the smoking.
Not so much anymore.
We're having it in our building. We just passed a thing in our building against smoking.
I think that the key here is to understand that we're all connected, and that we can pay kindness forward and impact our lives. We can do the opposite and impact our lives. And the bridge that connects us, at least the theology invited here, is God is somehow always involved, which means that our freedom is always somehow shaped by Atzat HaShem, the hands of heaven. Now, I realize this conversation can be a lot more complicated when we get to untimely death, say of a baby or a young person, right? Is that God's plan? Is the plan for God to bring this child closer? This is not a theology that I find comforting, certainly not one that I offer when people are mourning such devastation.
Not one that I buy either.
So, but it is, and by the way, Devorah, we've talked about this too. There are segments of the Jewish community that look at the Shoah and see it as a punishment for Zionism or assimilation. And to me, it's preposterous.
I agree.
But Atzat HaShem sort of forces us to consider, the limits of our openness to this kind of theology, which may mean that it's not only God's plan for all the good things that we enjoy about life, but God's plan involves all the things that make us mad at God and life and feel like life is unjust or unfair. There are those who feel like, you can't have it both ways. This is a tough theology for me, ultimately.
Mhm.
I find it hard to fathom that somehow, the Shoah is somehow part of God's will.
Yeah, that's the tough one.
Or
the toughest.
our own fault.
When you say "our," you mean the Jews' fault, not people in general.
Or wanting to create a Jewish homeland. I don't think either of which are do not merit a Shoah. I mean, it's obvious, but some feel that they do.
And
My sense of this theology is that we can't get to any meaningful connection with this theology if we don't first see somehow that we're all connected, and that how I behave somehow impacts you. How you behave somehow impacts me. We don't understand that sort of social contract, that kind of deep spiritual connection between us, then I think this theology is very elusive. It may already be anyway, but it doesn't make any sense to me if we don't know that, hey, somehow we impact each other and ought to be able to manage our freedom thus.
In these times, in this particular time, with this high contagion, we really are connected. Someone who traveled from Europe to New York, went to a party and everyone there got it, and then 30,000 people died. It's so connected that it's more real than I've ever seen.
Yes. Well, I agree. So let us take care of one another best we can, even if it means crimping our freedom a tad for the greater good. And in that setting, perhaps you can consider what it means ultimately to be part of God's plan, as the Proverbs indicate. Let's move to the next. Reinforcing more of this notion that all are in the hands of heaven, Atzat HaShem or Atzat HaShamayim. Let's see here. Ben, please. Freedom. Ben, are you there?
He's
Frozen. Devorah, please.
freedom, in the way most people use the word, is only an excuse to insist on moral culpability, which is only an excuse to pretend that the social good we do is from fear of punishment, instead of saying that we do
Sorry, my bad. That was a dirty trick. Sorry.
we do everything we do because we want to, which is the same as saying that we have no alternative. No alternative except one. We are free to be aware of the significance of each moment, to understand our destiny, or to avoid it. All is in the hands of heaven, save the fear of heaven, brachot. To fear heaven is to search for the holy intention that might be realized by our every act or discerned everywhere round about us. Except that my comment about what I just read is that being aware of the significance of each moment, that is really hard in the moment. And sometimes you do something that you go, oh my God, what was I thinking? Later when pondering or back to you.
Right. No, I get it. We're a lot about the past and a lot about the future. Very hard to be in the present. When we practice acts of meditation, the goal is actually not to be in the past or the future, but to try and be in the present. And one of the ways we capture that is through deep breathing and trying to gently urge our wandering mind back into the framework of that breathing exercise, staying in the moment without fear, without guilt. Remember we talked about the mead bar being a place that puts us astonishingly in the present, allows us to unpack our guilt, to unpack our anxiety and our worry about the future, allows us to be right in the moment. There's a certain freedom in that moment. And it's in the freedom of that moment that we have a choice to recognize our destiny or not. So the freedom exists in that recognizing activity, that effort towards recognition, paying attention, discovering intentionality. That is all an act of freedom, but ultimately, the concept here is that everything other than yirat hashamayim, fear of heaven, is in God's hands. Which is interesting to me because ultimately I have the choice, either follow God's will or not. I mean, is that any different than saying the mitzvot are commandments if we accept them as such? And if we don't, I guess they're not binding. Right? So are we ever really without a choice that we can understand? I think it's a function of why we're making the choice. You know, if we're just doing it because we're afraid, or we're just doing it because we feel like no one can ever trample on our freedom, we have no responsibilities to anyone else. I mean, I think we have those choices, but of course there'll be consequences. What's the consequence of not living a life of mitzvot? Are there zero consequences? Doesn't matter? Let me put it more plainly. What happens if we fail to love our neighbors? Or we fail to feed the hungry? Or we resist preserving the earth?
We become isolated.
We become isolated.
And pretty soon we have nowhere to live.
We destroy our planet. We fight wars all the time that destroy the humanity of
I think
the world.
there are a lot of ill acts, bad acts that people do because of some reason that it's really benefiting them. But as well, you know, as long as I'm benefiting, you know, myself, this is going to help other people, even when it really doesn't.
Well,
but people
right.
have all these reasons. So.
I think so. Look, to your point, it's an interesting reflection in that I can think of conversations about giving tzedakah. When you're like walking down the street and you see somebody, well, when we could walk down the street, right, downtown, you see somebody who's on the corner who's destitute, their head's down, it's so sad. And you just want to try and help them change their world around. Others aren't so generous. They ignore them, they ignore the humanity, won't make eye contact. And then there's some in between who kind of resistant to the human moment, don't want to really be part of it, but feel maybe guilty about tzedakah or, you know, ignoring the person, not helping or whatever. And so they give money, but they give money in a way that's not very kind. It's a bit dismissive, or it doesn't take the humanity of the person into account, or they toss the money at the person, you know, walk off in a huff. And Judaism says that's still tzedakah, despite the lack of intentionality or the negative intentionality. Tzedakah is tzedakah. But here I think that there's more to it. I think you do run the risk, even if you fulfill the mitzvah, if you don't do it with kindness. Remember, we're all connected. So yes, you may give somebody some money that will get them a morsel of bread, and that's a positive, but you may somehow diminish their humanity by tossing the money at them, right? And walking off in a huff. You know? And that's a real challenge when we're trying to understand a world in which we're all connected. And that sense of connection does place some limits on us doing whatever we feel like doing. And that ultimately, that sense of connectedness pushes us to understand that, in fact, we are connected with God. And so our intentionality for every act is a serious portal, serious entry point to understanding God in our lives, and ultimately our fear of heaven, which is a sense of respect for God and God's role in our lives. All is in the hands of heaven. So we're not completely free. This is at the root of my teacher's statement that free will is overrated. Right? We don't have to underrate it. We don't have to like ignore or dismiss it. Just be puppets of the Holy One. I do think we have to understand that if we throw rocks over our fence onto a public road, somebody's going to stub their toe and we're going to be responsible for it.
Mhm.
Because we're connected to that person. And so we should avoid that in the first place by not throwing the rocks. All right. Let us move forward. All right. Ben, are you back?
What's going on? Hey.
Why don't you read this piece from Nachmanides? Nachmanides is a Spanish philosopher and commentator in the medieval period. Lived
Yes.
around the time of Rambam.
Rambam Nachmanides teaches us that no man has any portion in the Torah of Moses, our teacher, until he understands that every one of our words and encounters, both in private and in public, are miracles and cannot be attributed merely to some natural, capricious order of the universe. End of Parshat Bo. And so words, actions, feelings, lives, and history have come from something and are destined to go to something, coming forth from a shared seed of the past, setting out for a common fulfillment in the future. Each one has a definite purpose. Each one assumes meaning from the greatest to the least, are all in part of the plan. And for this reason, the great purpose can be revealed to each one of us everywhere. Everything comes to teach us something about God's plan, therefore our destiny.
All right. So, right. We came up with a very mundane but important example of a person throwing rocks from his free space into a public space, which is not so free. It's not like it's his own. He can do whatever he wants. He has to pay attention. Rabbi Kushner and the mysticism here says this is like a miracle. This is what makes us human beings, is understanding it's not just some kind of capricious outcome of being alive, being part of creation, that we as human beings have this moral capacity that is pretty miraculous. And understanding that we have this moral capacity gives us our entitlement to Torah, to our portion of Torah. We all have a definite purpose. We're all connected through those definite purposes. So everything's a learning experience. Whether it's mundane, whether it's sacred, whether it makes sense, whether it doesn't make sense, whether it's inspirational, whether it's boring, everything's a learning opportunity because everything reveals something of God's plan for us. What does it mean to you to recognize that really every opportunity in life is a learning opportunity? I mean, do you think about that anyway?
Mostly professionally. I think of every time I do something that might take more time than I think it should, or I'm learning something new about the internet, I just look at that as a learning opportunity that I can then use in the future.
Yeah. Certainly in our professional settings, everything easy, difficult, wonderful, painful, all has a chance to help us grow.
Right.
I think that extends, beyond the workplace to our own lives.
I think you're right, but I don't always think of it that way. I don't always remember that.
Well, see, so I'll tell you what my challenge is. I agree with you. I don't always remember. I'm not always paying attention every single minute
Right.
of my life to the power of education that might come in that moment. I mean, at some point, I think what we're striving for is consistency over time. There's a certain intellectual recognition, even a spiritual recognition, that any moment that we encounter possesses in it an education. The invitation is ours to pay attention, to be free enough to focus in on whatever it is there is to learn.
I think you're right about not constantly, not always.
Yeah,
You'd go mad.
I think you would go mad. I also think that, what would be really important to you, right? If every single minute,
Yes.
I mean, I think just naturally we filter out stuff that doesn't seem that important, right? I think that the learning here teaches us not to be completely dismissive all the time of things we think maybe we're beyond. We don't have anything to learn anymore. I always had this interesting experience. Any of my classmates see this, they'll kill me. But I remember sometimes, we're busy people, and we go into a class, and maybe we felt like we had better things to do. It can happen sometimes when you're super busy, and maybe you have shut yourself off to any potential learning. I always found it important, no matter who I was studying with, whether they were easy to follow or difficult, whether what they had to teach me was going to change my life, or whether I might be tempted to see it just as another class I had to take on my way to ordination. I always felt that, if I went in kind of grounded and humble, there may be something surprising. Just pay attention enough, I might take away something. And by the way, even if it wasn't a function of taking away material wisdom, I had a chance to connect with another soul, be it my professor or another classmate. So it's always seemed like if I wanted to, I could find something to appreciate, something that would reveal a greater purpose than may have been indicated in the moment.
Wow, Rabbi, I must say, when I was in college, I seldom had that attitude. I wish I did, because I was much more, I got to get through this, I got to get a good grade, I got to do this. And sometimes it's really hard to be as altruistic. Obviously, you went to rabbinic school. I did not.
Yeah, well, listen, but you know what? Yes, I'm not sure this is a function of altruism. It's a function of awareness. Remember, looking at different realities, seeing different realities in the multiple realities, being able to parse them out. I have sat in class painfully bored, not clear why I was there. One class, thermodynamics, was so beyond me one day. I walked out of it, and I left my entire aspiration to go to medical school behind me, and it was on my way to rabbinic school. So I get it. We don't have time sometimes to waste. We don't want to be bored. We want to be moving. We're progress oriented. What I think is important here is that there's something beyond us. And our job is to use our freedom to pay attention. And that even in the mundane and capricious elements of things that we, judge to be capricious or mundane, there may be some shared seed of the past. There may be some common fulfillment available to us in the future. There may be some definite purpose that we can embrace. And somehow that understanding enables us just enough attention that we can pay to grow. And the idea here is that is the plan of God working on our lives, in and on our lives, enabling us to reveal truths, new truths about ourselves, about the world around us, about things we thought were boring but aren't actually when you take another look. We're going to pause here. Still a lot more material in this chapter, but we promise an hour. I'm finding that when we stick to an hour, things are better from week to week, I think. If you think differently, you can tell me offline. But we'll see you next time. We will do more work here on Atzat HaShem, the hands of heaven, maybe another text or two. And then we will enter into the fifth gate, through the fifth gate, which is the gate of Malachei Shemayim, the messengers from on high, or Malachei Elyon, I think is a better way to put it. The messengers from on high. There are people in our lives who bring us messages kind of in a Beshert sort of way, help us learn about ourselves. And without those messengers in our lives, we don't necessarily understand what our definite purpose is. So that should be very exciting. Struggle on, push kindness forward. Remember, we're all connected. And whether we're part of God's plan or not, we're all connected, and it matters how we behave to one another. So Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Be well. Glad
Shabbat
everybody
Shalom.
joined us. Peace.
Peace.